Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mr. TARDIS, and you guessed it, I'm in another hotel room right now. And full disclosure, I'm recording this on like the hottest day of the year. It is roasting in this hotel room, so I'll try and be brief, and I'll also try not to slip and sweat out of this armchair. And today we're reviewing the Big Finish box set, Unit Era's Hostile Universe. Now the Unit Eras box set is another subsection of Big Finish's unit box sets. There have been a bunch of Big Finish unit box sets featuring characters like Brigadier Bambera and also Kate Lethbridge-Stewart along with Osgood, and I've not really reviewed any of those because when I started reviewing Big Finish on this channel, those respective series, they were already midway through multiple story arcs, so I didn't really want to jump on midway through. Whereas with this range, Unit Eras, it's basically a variety pack of different unit eras throughout the whole history of Doctor Who, from the classic series to the Russell T Davies era to the Chibnall era to the Russell T Davies 2 era. And with Unit Eras, we've got 4 stories. We've got Rise of the Valiant by Andrew Smith, The Indigo Child by Ken Bentley, The Life and Death of Private Eddie Wise by Hannah Kennedy, and Dead Star by Joshua Pruitt and Jonathan S. Powell. And we're going to go through those 4 stories in order. So Rise of the Valiant takes place in 2008 when the Earth was moved across the universe along with other planets in the Stolen Earth and Journey's End Series 4 finale. And this story essentially looks at what was the Brigadier, played by John Culshaw, and Harry Sullivan, played by Christopher Naylor, what were they doing when that happened? And it turns out that they were in secondment in Peru together when the planet shifted. Units can't get a hold of the Doctor, the Daleks are invading, and they're also targeting strategic unit bases and also important people related to the Doctor, one of which is also the Brigadier. However, deep in the Brazilian rainforest, units have a backup plan. They have a secret weapon. It's the Valiant 2. The Valiant, which was completely destroyed by the Daleks in the Stolen Earth, they have a new and improved backup, and it's up to the Brigadier and Harry and this platoon of unit soldiers to try and deploy it and try and turn the tide of the battle.
Once again, though, instead of being where the action is, I'm stuck in Peru. 4 months I've wasted on this fool's errand, chasing down so-called monster sightings. Chupacabra, indeed. Stuff of myth and legend. Nonsense.
We would have said that once about the Loch Ness Monster.
Yes, well, that was different. The Zygons aren't likely to have another pet in the jungle, young man.
Young? I'm not all that far off retirement.
That's young to me.
We have an urgent update.
Oh, hello.
Around the world, radio receivers are picking up a signal from the approaching objects. It's being transmitted across all frequencies and channels. We should be able to play it for you shortly. Yes, here it is.
Exterminate! Exterminate!
Oh, no.
Not the Sontarans, then. Something far, far worse.
Exterminate! Exterminate!
Rise of the Valiant is a proper fan brain story. Like, okay, what was the Brigadier doing during the Stolen Earth? It is such a fanboy pitch, and I kind of respect it for that. Conceptually, we've got to call it as it is. It is basically low-hanging fruit when it comes to storytelling. You know, of course, the Brigadier was fighting off Daleks when he was in secondment in Peru off-screen during Series 4. Of course, that's what he was doing. You know what? It was a fun story, though. I think it did have a good push-pull back and forth between the Brigadier and the Daleks, although the Daleks early on in the story, they say out in the open when they're conversing with other Daleks, they're saying, oh, we need to kill the Brigadier, and then later on it's like, no, we need the Brigadier alive. Like, what do the Daleks want with the Brigadier? That is a bit of a plot hole that is never really filled in. I also think that while John Culshaw is terrific as usual as the Brigadier, I think he does a fantastic job, and his enthusiasm for Doctor Who and for the Brigadier as a character cannot be denied. He doesn't really seem to do anything, from what I could hear at least, to age up the Brigadier to the age that he would have been at this time in the Doctor Who universe, because we saw the Brigadier, we saw Lethbridge-Stewart in the Sarah Jane Adventures when he was older, but John Culshaw doesn't really seem to be attempting to channel that specific age, that specific voice for the Brigadier. You close your eyes, you listen to this audio drama, and this is the same Brigadier as the 70s and the 80s Doctor Who, and, you know, it dampens the immersion slightly, movie, and I think it would have been nice to see John Coleshaw try and attempt an older version of the character to make it more, vocally more interesting. But like I said, it's a fanboy brain story. I just did really get excited when the Brigadier and Harry try and call the Doctor on their mobile phones. I got very excited when they intercept the transmission from the incoming Dalek ships, and it's just the repeated message of exterminate, exterminate. Like I said, it's low-hanging fruit, but I dug it. I don't know, maybe I'm just a simple man. I also liked the vibe the story was going for. It was a little bit Jerry Anderson, with a bit of like aircraft fetishism, all of these different advanced pieces of military hardware hiding in plain sight. I kind of dug that. As someone who loved watching Jerry Anderson growing up, I liked the vibe of the story. And also, it'll be an interesting story in regards to the canon of UNIT. There's the fate of one particular character in this story that seems to break the canon of multiple expanded universe Doctor Who stories, so they'll probably ignore that, but I just thought it was quite interesting. And the next story is The Indigo Child by Ken Bentley, and before we start on that, I'm turning a fan on. It's way too hot in this room. I'm sorry in advance for any hum or background noise that you may hear, but it is literally 38 degrees outside. So this story is set during the Chibnall era. It's set in 2017, and Kate Lethbridge-Stewart has been ousted from UNIT, presumably killed by Prentice, that is the Grand Serpent in Survivors of the Flux from Series 13. And I completely forgot that the Grand Serpent's civilian name was Prentice until listening to this. That's the impact the character had on my subconscious. But Kate Stewart has formed a new underground fighting force separate from UNIT, and she meets up with Osgood to explain where on earth has she been, because UNIT and Osgood have presumably thought that she died in some sort of gas leak explosion in her home. However, Kate and Osgood are on the case of a young nameless child who can't speak English. She presumably came to the UK on a Syrian small boat, and she appears to have some sort of telekinetic powers, and Kate and Osgood are attempting to find this child and make sure that she does not go into the wrong hands, and also just to keep her safe.
How could you leave me? Us. After all we've been through, Josh and I were going out of our minds. But we sat tight, like you said, and then you just vanished.
I left you a voicemail.
That told me precisely nothing.
The attempt on my life gave me a very small window of opportunity.
To do what?
Escape.
From who?
Well, for starters, Prentice.
Well, he's just a pen pusher.
Is he?
Isn't he?
What if I told you he's a non-terrestrial life form with the ability to move through time?
He's the Doctor.
Oh, I wish. No, he's far more dangerous than that. And he may not be the only imposter in Whitehall, which means we don't know who to trust.
But you trust me?
With my life.
Out of all of the stories in this box set, The Indigo Child was, for me, sort of the most forgettable one. I listened to it a few days ago, and I'm kind of struggling to recount anything specific that really happened, outside of the very Stranger Things vibe that this story has going for it. A young mute girl appears out of nowhere with telekinetic powers, and this ragtag group have to try and make sure that the government don't snatch her up. It is very Stranger Things, and Stranger Things wasn't the first TV show to tell that type of story, but the vibes are very strong. I think that Osgood and Lethbridge-Stewart had a very strong dynamic with each other. I'm sure that that's a holdover from the previous Big Finish box sets, which, like I mentioned up top, I've not really listened to. And I think The Indigo Child is sort of working as a backdoor pilot for a potential future series of UNIT box sets where it's Osgood and Lethbridge-Stewart trying to go underground during Series 13, during the Chibnall era, between Survivors of the Flux and The Power of the Doctor. And it's an interesting pilot in that respect, sort of just laying the groundwork for this potential new underground network that Kate has been working at. But as a story on its own, I think that the cast are pretty good. Natalie Gomedi is giving a genuinely good performance where she's playing the social worker who really has the best interests of this child at heart, but has no idea what she's gotten herself in for. I think that the dynamic between her and Kate was really effective. And I really liked how Osgood responded to the child and tried to relate and sympathize with the child itself. And, it was a nice, recurring beat over the course of the story. And now for the third story of the box set, we have The Life and Death death of Private Eddie Wise. This takes place in the 70s or the 80s unit, where Sarah Jane Smith, she's only just started at unit, she's with the 3rd Doctor and the Brigadier, and we meet Private Eddie Wise, played by George Sumner. And the concept of this episode, as outlined in the behind the scenes making of feature for this particular episode, is what if we made a Doctor Who unit story about that one guy from the 3 Doctors who goes, "Holy Moses, what's that?" And that's what the life and death of Private Eddie Wise is. The titular Private Eddie Wise is a unit soldier whose first day on the job was in the Invasion episode 7, when the Cybermen start invading and he's just thrust into the action, and this is his first encounter with extraterrestrial life. And what does that do to a person? And when you have signed the Official Secrets Act and you can't tell anything to your family and friends about everything that you're going through and the life and death encounters that you have with aliens on a daily basis, and you see your friends who are basically red shirts just torn apart by Zygons and Axons and Cybermen and Daleks and all manner of space thuggery, what does that do to you? And that's the concept at the heart of the life and death of Private Eddie Wise. And Sarah Jane Smith, she's working as a journalist, and she's basically given an ultimatum by her boss. Sarah Jane can't write about the stories that she wants to write about unless she presents a story about unit to her boss, to her editor. And she thinks that Private Eddie Wise would be an ideal subject for an article in order to try and change unit and improve it so that it has a more empathetic approach to its employees, to the people who work under the Brigadier.
Got in a bit of bother.
What sort of bother?
Nicked a bottle of rum and stole a Bobby's bike to get away.
Oh.
You know, it's dumb kid stuff. I joined the army so they'd drop the charges, and the Brigadier showed up to the barracks one day, watched us training. I was transferred to unit. I didn't know what it was, but I don't know, it seemed exciting. Sometimes I wish I could go back. Tell myself excitement isn't everything. Leave that bike alone.
People spend their whole lives looking for excitement.
Yeah? And what I wouldn't give to be boring.
Then why don't you quit?
Well, because it's men like me who have to stand in front of the monsters and look them in the eyes. No matter how terrifying that is. And we're the ones who have to stop them. And if we didn't do that, then everyone else, they wouldn't get a chance to be boring. And I think everyone should have the option to be boring. Boring seems pretty brilliant to me.
I found the life and death of Private Eddie Wise to be a story that basically justified the entire Unit Era's Hostile Universe box set in and of itself. It's a really empathetic and fascinating look at the ground level of the Doctor Who universe. It reminds me a little bit of something like Love and Monsters, where how would the rest of the world react to these world-ending catastrophes day after day, and like what does that do to someone? And doing it specifically from the perspective of Unit, where, you know, Private Eddie Wise, he's engaged to somebody at the start of the story, and like there's a rift that develops between him and his fiancée. He's having an affair with a Lance Corporal at work because she's the only person that he can actually speak to about everything that's happening in his life. And there's this really great recurring sound effect where he's talking to somebody and he's having PTSD flashbacks, and their voice morphs into an Invasion Cyberman voice mid-sentence, and every time it happens, it's really effective every time it does. And like it sounds like it would get repetitive, it sounds a bit cliche, but the way it is implemented, it really impacted me every time I heard it. It was really strategically done. Sadie Miller is a great presence in the story as this optimistic, upbeat female presence in this male-dominated space at Unit, and you know, she's really good, but the MVP is George Sumner, who gives a really terrific and sensitive portrayal of Private Eddie Wise. I think he really holds the story together emotionally. It's a really strong performance vocally. If there is one issue that I have with the story, and it is a kind of nitpick and I don't see a way around it other than removing the character entirely, it's the Brigadier's inclusion. He's played once again by John Coleshaw, and I think having the Brigadier so involved in the story, particularly in the final scenes, it kind of hampers what the story might be going for. Because if the Brigadier is so present when all of these systemic issues and this differential attitude to Unit employees and the soldiers and their mental health, if he's so present when these issues come to a head, then it's kind of on the Brigadier to fix it. And we're not given much evidence in the TV show proper that things do change substantially under the Brigadier's watch after the events of the story, because this takes place, very early Sarah Jane, before the events of Planet of the Spiders, when the Third Doctor regenerates into the Fourth Doctor. So we're not actually given much evidence in the TV series that things do improve for people like Private Eddie Wise, and that's kind of a bit of an issue, and it reflects poorly on the Brigadier as a character, because it makes him responsible for the terrible working conditions under his watch. I don't want to make a huge deal of this particular quote issue, because I think it's an unavoidable issue with trying to tell a story like this. I guess maybe think that the story could have leaned into it a bit more. I don't think it's an intentional byproduct of this episode to make the Brigadier of the TV series look bad. I just think that it's just the unintended consequence of telling the story with the source material of the unit stories broadcast in the 70s. But still, I think Hannah Kennedy's script is really, really strong. It's the standout story of the box set for me. But not to be too outshone by Hannah Kennedy, Joshua Pruitt and Jonathan S. Powell collaborate to bring us Dead Star, which is the final story in this unit era's box set, and it's set during the Bad Wolf era of Doctor Who, specifically around the 60th anniversary with the Giggle, because apparently Big Finish now has the license to utilise those characters from that particular story, which includes the older Mel, played by Bonnie Langford, that appears in that story, and also the Vlinks, voiced by Nicholas Briggs. And that's really interesting when it comes to the licensing for Big Finish, because Morris, the scientific advisor from season 1, The Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death, he's mentioned, but he doesn't turn up. So do Big Finish have the license to him? Because I'd love Lenny Rush to be in these Big Finish box sets. But anyway, I'm going on a massive tangent. So the new technologically advanced unit tower in the Bad Wolf era has a Starcaster telescope, which Mel and fellow unit employee Isla Ellis, played by Danielle Bird, are looking through. However, what happens when a supercluster of dying stars looks back through the telescope? And these entities, which call themselves the Cold Ones, manage to possess the body of the Vlinks, and the Vlinks' consciousness is transferred to Mel's phone. The unit skyscraper is placed under lockdown, Kate Lethbridge-Stewart is locked outside, and Mel, the Vlinks, and Isla and a bunch of other unit employees are locked inside with this possessed Vlinks, and they have to try and stop the Cold Ones from getting out of Unit Tower to freeze the whole world.
Why is the Vlinks calling you?
The Vlinks is not calling.
What do you mean?
I escaped.
Escape what? The outage?
I engaged lockdown procedures to protect, defend.
You'd best explain yourself.
I had to move my consciousness to escape, run to Melanie's phone.
Why would you do that? My phone's rubbish.
Indeed, yes. No tech. Harder for them to translate, to follow.
For what to follow? What were you running from?
There is something else in my body. We are cold. So cold.
Sir, why does it sound like that?
I don't know, and I don't care for it. With me, Lane? If we're going to help these people, we need that thing shut down.
But sir, shut down the Vlinks.
I don't think that's the Vlinks. At least not anymore. It's got power, proper power, nothing else does. That means it's either involved or it's responsible. Either way, we need the lockdown lifted and we need help. Morris, Shirley, anyone who can actually understand how it works.
Dead Star is a solid base under siege unit story where the Doctor is not coming to help, and Mel knows that, so Mel essentially takes the Doctor role in Dead Star, with Isla Ellis being the companion surrogate, the companion role to Mel's Doctor. And it's a good role for Mel. Bonnie Langford acquits herself to this new dynamic really admirably, and I think that Joshua Pruitt and Jonathan S. Powell have done a really good job at making the Cold Ones a legitimately creepy threat. Nicholas Briggs voices the Cold Ones and also the Vlinks, and it's a really creepy vocal performance, the way he channels these really creepy creatures through the Vlinks' vocal cords. You know, I was getting chills, and not just because these things freeze everyone. And I think the narrative through line of having Isla Ellis channel her own grief and trauma of losing her mother in these flashbacks where she was living in the countryside while her mother was dying, and she'd look up at the stars because there's no light pollution, and she really wanted to become an astronaut, but now she's she's just settling for working at UNIT and not actually traveling up into space, so she envies Mel. There's a lot going on under the surface here, and it's also a story kind of about the dangers of nostalgia and looking back into the past, because when you look at the cold ones through the Starcaster telescope, they're dead stars that have already long died, but the light has not reached Earth yet, and that's a really interesting conceit for a villain. And the idea of making a story about the dangers of nostalgia, the dangers of relying on the past and looking too deeply at the past and wanting to go back, doing that story, that allegory, through the Bad Wolf era of all eras of Doctor Who is fucking hilarious to me. I'm not saying that Joshua Pruitt and Jonathan S. Powell and the people involved in this box set have done it deliberately, but I can't help but see potential unintended shade at Russell T Davies for, you want to bring back Sutekh and Omega and the UNIT Tower and Mel and all of these other characters and what's meant to be a new era. Great, we're gonna co-opt those characters and co-opt that setting to talk about the dangers of nostalgia. Like I said, I don't know if it's intentional, but if it was, it's really ballsy storytelling, and I really admire it for that if that's the case. But yeah, Dead Star, strong character stuff, strong performances, really strong thematically. It's a really strong story. The UNIT Era's Hostile Universe box set is basically comprised of a bunch of 7 to 9 out of 10 stories that I really, really enjoyed. It's not a game-changing box set, other than it potentially acting as a backdoor pilot with the Indigo Child for Kate Lethbridge-Stewart and Osgood to have their own potential new range for the UNIT Big Finish box sets, but I'd be interested in hearing more diverse stories from these different periods of UNIT history. I think that it's a really strong conceit to get a lot of great variety into these box sets, and a great variety in terms of its cast members and utilising these different settings and these different voice actors. It's a fan-pleasing box set with fan-favourite characters, and I think there is genuinely something in here for everyone. But that's my review of UNIT Era's Hostile Universe. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below if you have listened to this box set. I'm now gonna melt in a puddle of my own sweat, but before I do that, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, hype the video, all that good stuff, and folks, I'll see you all next time.